This house is a bit of a mess electrically. They've got switches on top of switches. They've got outlets that don't match the cover plates, switches that don't match the cover plates. So it's a bit of a long-term project to update it. But today I'm going to show you how to fix one of those problems, and we're going to update these two switches. Before you start any project, it's important to make sure you have the right footwear. In this case, I have my electrician work boots on. And when these things are on, you know I mean business. So let's pop off this cover plate and take a gander at what we're dealing with here. Naturally, with any old home, the cover plate has been painted on, so I use my razor blade and still somehow managed to peel some paint off. Also seems like the switch has been kind of textured over / painted on as well. I don't know what they were thinking with the texture, don't ask me. And then we can pull the switches out and see what we got. Right off the bat, I could see they didn't bother grounding the dimmer switch. So in my previous video, I showed you exactly how a 3-way and a 4-way circuit work. So I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail in this video about this. I'm just going to swap out this switch. Instead, we'll focus on the dimmer switch side of this box. First, I'm going to shut off the breaker to the dining room, and then I'm going to go back and check and make sure there's no voltage present. But just because something's in the same box doesn't necessarily mean it's on the same circuit. So the 4-way switch still has power, which means it's on a different breaker. And I know it's off because the kitchen lights are off, but it's always good to double check. And I showed you in a previous video how to use a voltmeter instead of these pens, because some guys will ultimately come at me and say these are a way to get yourself hurt, but I find they work pretty good. This is what's considered a single pole installation. It's just one line in from the panel, one load out to the light. There's no other switches. And as you watch some of my electrical videos, you'll hear me over and over again saying line and load. Line means it's the power that's coming into the switch. Load means it's the power going out of the switch. The switch works by interrupting the circuit between the power from the panel and the light. When the switch is off, it stops the flow of current to the light. When the switch is on, it enables it. Easy peasy, right? A dimmer switch works by limiting the amount of current that's going out to the load wire, which you adjust on the switch to make brighter or dimmer. Sliding the dimmer switch down reduces the current by adjusting the voltage. Sliding it all the way up gives the light full power. So I'm going to be replacing the dimmer with a new smart dimmer kit by Lutron, who was nice enough to send this over for me to test out. No, I'm not being paid. They sent me this and asked for some feedback, so that's what I'm doing. Now this has some interesting features, so we'll dive into those in a minute. Right off the bat, it comes with the snap-on screwless faceplate, but it's only for a single box, so we already know we're not going to use that, so we'll pull that off. And I turn the power back off after demonstrating the line versus load thing. And you'll notice there's a lot more than 2 wires coming out of the back of the new switch, and that's okay. It's designed to work in a variety of applications, so we're not going to use them all. Again, this is what's called a single pole installation, so that's what we're going to focus on. Because the previous dimmer wasn't grounded, I got to dig through the box and grab the ground wire. And then we can start to wire this up. So I'm going to use the green wire on the new switch to go to the bare copper ground wire. And I'll get those twisted up and put a wire nut on them. And then when it comes to the 2 wires coming out of the box, the line in and the load, it doesn't really matter which way you do it, but we're going to connect the black wire and the red wire to the line and the load. But that leaves us with the blue wire that's coming out of the switch, and we're not going to need that for this application. So what we're going to do is just kind of bend it over and put a wire cap on it. We're not going to use it. That comes into play if we were doing a 3-way or 4-way, which isn't what we're doing with this particular one. So then I'll get the red and the black connected, and then I'll put the small wire nut that comes in the package for the blue wire and cap that off. And then from a wiring perspective, this side of the box is pretty much complete. Now, many smart switches do require a neutral connection, but this one does not. If you had a white wire coming out of a smart switch like this, you would just connect that to the white bundle of wires inside your junction box. I'm aware that in some instances in older homes, they typically didn't have neutral wires inside switch boxes. That's another ball of wax to kind of get into. But if you have a switch that you want to be able to dim that you don't have access to a neutral wire for, this is a good option. Now, there's a couple nice features that come along with this. Number one, what makes this smart is that you can connect the switch to what's called the Lutron hub. And the hub you connect to your Wi-Fi router just by plugging in the Ethernet cord and then plugging it into the wall. What this allows you to do is download the Lutron app, and you can use the app to control it, or you can link it to Google Home or Amazon or whatever you have. And doing that allows you to use voice control to control the dimmer switch if that's something you're into. Now, what I find more interesting than even the smart features, which, are pretty typical these days, is that this kit comes with this little remote. And you sync it to the dimmer switch just by pressing down and holding the button on each one for a few seconds. Having a remote in itself is not that groundbreaking or perhaps that practical, but what's interesting about it is it comes with this plate, and what this allows you to do is basically mount it to the wall in another location, and you've effectively turned this from a single pole installation to a three-way installation. So using the plate and then the parts that I didn't end up using that came with this, I could just mount this directly to the wall, screw it to the wall with some drywall anchors, and then just snap the cover plate on, and it would look just like any old switch with no wiring whatsoever. It's effectively a wireless three-way switch at that point that also can be controlled from your phone. So if you have an area of your home that really should be on a three-way switch but isn't, this could be a great option. It pretty much negates all the knowledge that I just shared with you in my previous video about how a three-way switch works. So now we're going to shift back to the other switch, which again is a four-way switch that I told you I'm not really going to dive into too much detail on because I previously did it in another video. But the reason that I know it's a four-way switch is because it has 4 screw terminals on the back of it, 1 on each corner of the switch, not including the ground. If you include the ground, then technically it has 5. So if you want more information on how a 4-way and a 3-way switch works, make sure you go back and watch my previous video that dives into detail on all that. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to swap the wires just as they are from this switch to a new Decora style 4-way switch. Don't let the white confuse you. These are not actually neutral wires. Whoever wired them just used them as traveler wires. They should actually be labeled with a piece of black tape on them so that they mark them as travelers. But you never know what you're going to come across when you're working on an older home. So it's really important to understand how the different types of switches work and know how to identify what's what. So there you go. We've got our switches all wired up. And all we've got to do is get our faceplate put on, solder up our screws. And I've got a little bit of touch-up paint here to do around the switch where the paint peeled off. But other than that, we've got our Lutron Smart Dimmer Kit installed and a new Decora style 4-way switch. And wouldn't you know it, the switches match the cover plate. How novel. So if you're interested in adding a smart dimmer switch to your home, I recommend that you check out Lutron. You can see all their products on their website at lutron.com or find them at your local Home Depot. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.